we have engineers, then we have front-end designers, so that the engineers can do the deep engineer stuff. The front-end designers can do what they're best at, really good HTML and CSS using patterns and design systems and knock stuff out. And then the product designers can make it look nice. And those kind of, as a front-end designer, you do have input on it and working with the design team, and you'd be on the design team. But it's a cool job, so apply now at TrainerRoad.com/jobs.
Sweet. Awesome. Also, we should probably welcome a couple, and we are live on YouTube now, Nate. Thanks cool. For the heads up there. We should also probably welcome a couple folks that have joined just recently, Babs and Will. Welcome to the team. Recently, we just talked about positions for brand designers, and we brought both of them on. We're super excited to have them, so pretty cool stuff. And one other thing, too, that we should cover is there's a new podcast coming. You heard the first episode of it just a couple weeks ago with Keegan Swenson when we talked with him about his world record, or Everesting world record. And we have 2 more episodes that will also be live as soon as the podcast goes live, which is slated for tomorrow at this point, which is exciting. So if you're listening to this now, that would be Friday, May 29th, and this is 2020. So if you're listening after the fact, chances are you already started listening to the podcast because it's pretty awesome. So the second episode, we'll be talking to a guy named Sergio Sandoval, who went sub-9 at Leadville, went from not training much at all to training super consistently and got there. It's pretty cool. So we talked to him about how he did that. Talked to another gentleman who actually we spoke with back in October at Kona, Norman Bannock. We talked to him before Kona, and then we follow up with him after. He ended up, I think, 100th overall after a couple doping suspensions that existed or that happened for for Kona, because his goal was to go 100th overall and to go sub-9. He didn't get sub-9. He went 9:11, which is crazy at Kona if you think about that. That's so fast. But he went 9:11 and still had plenty of things that he had to work through. So we discussed those. It's super interesting. So it's fantastic, and it's a good opportunity for us to learn from, we could call them ordinary athletes, just because in many cases they're just like you and I, but they do extraordinary things. And that's the whole point of the Successful Athletes podcast. So you can look forward to that one, and we will just stay tuned to our social channels, and you'll be able to find that. Stay tuned to the TrainerRoad forum, and we'll have links to those episodes, and we'll be having an episode every week. And also, if you want to be on that podcast, if you've done something, it doesn't have to be a race win either. We're going to have stories that cover the gamut. So a wide range.
And go ahead. Sorry, I interrupt. Go ahead.
Please. Yep.
I would love people to, cycling is a lot of 20 to 30-year-old white men. There's so many other successful stories. You could have just gone from off the couch to doing your first century. We want to hear about that because that's a different journey too, and things you experience. It could be a weight loss. It could be, moving from Cat 4 to Cat 3, something like that. Doing your first triathlon. Those kind of stories too inspire a lot of people, rather than Norman's awesome, but hard to relate to Norman because he does a 9/11 at Kona, right? So don't think my story's not interesting because I didn't get top 100 and beat a bunch of dopers at Kona. That's, you know what I mean? So totally. Please send those in. You don't have to be a Keegan Swenson either to do it.
Yeah, in fact, it doesn't have to be anything related, just to reiterate what you said, Nate, it doesn't have to do with racing at all, right? Mm-hmm. Any sort of achievement that's noteworthy, that you feel is noteworthy, just let us know about it. Because at the very least, we love hearing about that. And we share that throughout the company, and it makes everybody really excited. So we're all really motivated by how we can help people and truly, genuinely help people. So that's a huge thing for us. So if you do want to submit that, just send me an email, jonathan@trainerroad.com, if you have a story where you want to talk about it and hopefully help some other people through the same process. It'd be really cool. So it's an exciting podcast, and I can't wait to run that in parallel with Ask a Cycling Coach podcast. Do you want to talk about the other one too, Nate?
Let's talk about it.
Let's do it. Yeah.
We recorded our first episode of another new podcast we're doing. This one's called The Science of Getting Faster. And here's the problem, and we're guilty of it ourselves, there'll be research done, and then there'll be an article about it. And people won't really understand what the research is, and they'll have a takeaway from the article, and it's not really backed up by what the research says. An instance of that is when, it'll say something prevents aerobic adaptations, but it doesn't change performance, right? So everyone goes, we have to stop taking XYZ or doing XYZ. but really if it doesn't change performance. So we wanted to have a podcast where we talk to the actual researchers who did the paper, did the study, like the actual person directly, see what their studies suggest and what they don't, and then where future research is. And it was really cool. We did Dr. Minson, the first blog post we ever did about heat adaptation that I ever did for TrainerRoad was his study. We've cited him many, many times on the podcast. And I don't know, Chad, how many times have we researched heat adaptations? Like a bajillion. And we still learn stuff because he's learning stuff and he's talked about some of the new research. Chad, did you learn stuff?
Yeah, it was wonderful because he solidified some things that I thought I had a pretty good understanding on, but he also answered some questions that no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't root them out. I couldn't figure out. It didn't matter where I looked, what things I put together, what I extrapolated from what research. I needed to hear it from a researcher who had been in that same spot, who had solved those very questions, or at least encountered them in maybe even his educational process. But to hear him state them was magical. I mean, it put 3 big points to bed for me. And now I feel like I have a firm grasp on that. And it's only going to benefit everything I do from this point forward, just having a firmer understanding of some pretty high level stuff.
As a listener to this from the outside in, because I wasn't involved in the discussion, I also found it really fascinating we went, and the plan is for this to go into the process of how the studies were carried out, but then also go into the process of learning. And I thought that something that's really cool is we all know from this podcast that, Chad very much is like Chad and Amber. You're our resident experts, right? And Chad's deep dives are where we go for that. And Chad doesn't get there because Chad just, matrix downloads everything to his brain or something, or naturally has it. It's through searching and discovering and asking questions. And I thought it was really cool. I learned even just how you thought about things, Chad, and you asking questions to Chris was really helpful in and of itself, because it helped me understand, like, okay, I should question just the basic things that I try to explain to myself and figure I understand. I should question all the things, and I should look at it from a fair perspective. It's awesome.
It's a solid point. It's a solid point because too often we think we understand something when in fact, we have our understanding of it. That doesn't mean it's accurate. It doesn't mean it's correct.
Mm-hmm.
And then Amber and Brandon are not allowed to listen to this episode until 7 days before Cape Epic.
Fantastic transition.
I know.
Necessary competitive advantage.
Yeah. So this is a big deal.
Oh gosh, yes. Cape Epic 2021 is happening.
Happening.
So I am not doing it, and this is definitely. I know a lot of people are thinking like, you're the mountain biker. But it's not a race that I want to do. Nate, you already raised your hand there. I don't know if you want to jump in.
Yeah, this is, what was it, 6 a.m. West Coast? So it was us 3 and then Brandon and Pete. And we're there refreshing a web page like every 2 seconds trying to get in, because I think they only had 200 slots open because it got delayed or something. And we got in. So we have 3 teams going to Cape Epic in South Africa. Yes. And the teams are... me and Sophia Gomez Villafane. Did I say that right?
Yeah, it works. She wouldn't be upset about it. Yeah.
I'll just call her Sophia. Everyone knows that. Amber and Brandon, and then Chad and Pete. And it's going to be a good race. And one thing that people don't understand, well, let me just say 2 things about it. 3 things. First thing, it is a team race, which means you don't leave your teammate. So although Brandon is by far the best climber, it doesn't matter because he's got to climb with your teammate. And Sophia totally outclimbs me. So she's got to climb with me, and she outdescends me. So she does everything better than me.
But the flats is where you'll be really helpful.
I'm going to drop her. Yeah. So that's a very important part to think about. It's also 8 days. The first day being I think the winners are just around an hour. But then after that, on these stages, it's like the winners will be 5.5 hours, I think, for co-ed. They're long days. So 7 of that in a row from up to 10,000 feet of climbing. I think the low climbing is 7,000 feet.
For anybody that's ridden on a mountain bike, that is so much climbing. It's a little different than on the road, because on the road you can just cover more distance and cover it a little quicker. So every one of those feet is gained with a bit more sweat, so to speak. It's
a lot different.
Yeah.
It's really
3,000
hard.
meter days, or 2,000 to 2,500 meter days. I think a 3,000's in there, something like that. But insane.
Yeah, this is going to be so. I'm really excited to see how this plays out because, like you said, Nate, the team element really tends to, or it kind of normalizes things, unless you have two people that just have really similar skill sets and are, well positioned at the front of the field, so to speak. Yeah. But in this case, it's. I think that we're going to have an interesting showing between Amber. You have so much, and actually we should probably just get into this right now, but you have actually we'll get into it in just a bit. You have so much experience stage racing, and that's going to be something that's and also you have a ton of depth, and you're going to train for this, of course, so who knows how fast you're going to get. It's going to be really interesting to see that experience versus Sophia, who's a current pro, right, as well, but she certainly doesn't have as many years racing and doing stage races as Amber does, and it's just going to to I don't know where to. Actually, I already know where I'm putting my money, but it's a close contest.
I know. It's
okay.
So everyone should know this, that the most competitive people at TrainerRoad would be Amber and Brandon, right? So when people are like, "Nate, you're too," somebody, somebody, so if someone's like, "Oh, you have toxic competition or whatever," like, too bad. This is going down. We are right, Amber. The Google talk is crazy inside the office.
Amber's throwing down in Slack. Like she's she's throwing down.
She seems all nice here, but she just I said something and she listed out 15 wins that she did on climbing, and she's like, "What? Come at me, bro." But just so you know, there is a competition, and we are I am thirsty for competition right now. Brandon's on my Strava being looking at all my descents saying why didn't you go faster? Because there were hikers, that's why. But so anyways, just to set the stage, we are totally racing each other. We'll be nice to each other, but we're racing each other. And then Chad, what are your and Pete's objectives?
Yeah, I know everyone's gonna laugh at this, but I think we're both pretty serious about it. I mean, we plan to train very diligently for it. This is a big deal. This isn't something you can phone in, first off, not even if you wanted to. Secondly, it's an opportunity to travel to Africa for crying out loud. That's a big deal. And it's a big event. So I'm completely motivated. I was motivated for nationals. I got taken off the table. I needed to redirect. And now I've got something that's a true goal. I mean, it's going to be challenging on so many levels. And I think Pete's on the same page.
So you guys are competing again. You're not going to do 8-hour days.
No,
you're gonna go.
I wouldn't do that anyway. That's.
I don't think they could if they tried. Honestly,
don't challenge him, Amber. It's possible. No. Just for anybody on those courses, anything can turn into an 8-hour day. It would be a terrible day, but that's the thing about it is they're so long, they're so difficult, there's so much going on. Mechanicals happen. Oh gosh, it's
Quite honestly, I'm not super concerned about the competitive aspect of it so much as the performance aspect of it. I want to do well, and I want to do well every day. And in doing so, I'll be competitive because of that, or we will be competitive because of that.
Yeah, no, I just mean, I think it would be really hard for either of them to not take this seriously, at least to some degree. I just can't see him phoning it in on any level.
I want to go through then each of the skills or things inside of here and kind of say which team do we think at this time, because a lot can change between now and then, would win this. Win those ones to kind of give an idea of who's going to win overall.
This would make for bad podcasting, but I want to do the eyes closed vote on each of these just to see where all of us are. But we won't do that because that wouldn't be great for the podcast.
I think we already know our own ideas. Okay, first climbing. So and I put this on Instagram, but people think that Brandon, it's going to win because Brandon's on Amber's team, right? But it's not the fastest. Brandon being 5.3 watts per kilo just means that he's going to climb at whatever Amber's pace is. So thought about this. This is watts per kg, not really technical climbing, just fire road climbing. I say it's a wash between Amber and I. I'll probably come in at 4.2 watts per kilo, 4 to 4.2 at sea level. Amber thinks 4 to 4.2 at sea level, somewhere around there. Does that sound right, Amber?
4-ish, yeah.
Yeah. So if Amber came in at 4.5, we'd be in a lot of trouble. Sophia's at about 4.8 watts per kilo, so she'll have a little easier time. The one thing that could change is Brandon could push Amber, and Sophia could push me.
Physically push, you're saying, not Mm-hmm.
And in a normal male female combo, usually it's a bigger man, and usually at least at the top, it's a UCI pro man, and then I think the last year was him and his wife. And from I met someone who was racing against them and said, yeah, he would push her up the climb some because he was probably, over 6 watts per kilo and would give her a half a watt per kilo. I think in this situation, it's a little funny because Sophia would be pushing me and I'm way bigger than Sophia. And then Amber, I think you're bigger than Brandon. So like that would also be a little different. So it evens a little bit. And I think too, to be able to push someone, it's a different level of skill, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's like,
it's hard.
You have to be a really good mountain biker. And I think Brandon, Amber, and I are not anything close to a UCI pro level skill. So the pushing might not happen, but maybe Sophia could push me, but still she's so small that it's probably a small benefit to me.
I've got a solution for this. It's called the Toei. I have it for Simon. It's a strap with a bit of elasticity, and I put it around his stem, and then I put it around my seat post. You guys can just like hook that thing up, and then you can tow each other up the hills. It'd be fantastic.
You joke about that, but it's a good idea. But is it legal? I can't imagine.
I'm sure it's not legal. I would hope it's not.
I didn't even say Chad, but at this moment, the watts per kg, I think Pete would climb just right around us at 4 to 4.2. But so far, Chad is we'll see if he can get back to 4. It's possible.
I won't have a problem getting back to 4. Yeah, 4 is fine. I'm aiming for a little higher up, 4.2, 4.3, 4.4.
Nice.
Okay, so it is a wash between all of us. Chad, by the way, Chad, are you going to plan to lose any weight?
Yeah, I think so, because this kind of folds into our triathlon, and I've been running more, and just a bit of weight loss, even if it's just a couple kilograms, will impact. I mean, what were we talking? 7 days of 6-7 hours a day?
8. Well, yeah.
Oh,
yeah, John.
And I keep forgetting that. Well, the prologue's short. Yeah.
That was a very sad. I keep forgetting that.
7 is already so long.
Yeah, for sure. I feel you, Chad. That's why I'm not doing it. But it's not an entire wash, though, Nate, because especially with mountain biking, fatigue causes mistakes and it compounds. And if you enter an already tiring section of course or a tiring day, and the climbing at 4.2 watts per kilogram is absolutely where you're at, versus if Brandon's at 5.3, Sophia's at 4.8 or 4.8, whatever it is, they'll come into those situations with a much clearer head, a more fresh body. They won't be as tired. They're less likely to make mistakes. So I think that the biggest thing to keep in mind with that is the fact that with these stage races, freshness is just disappearing constantly. It's almost like if you think of like a startup in their burn rate, like as you go through a stage race, your burn rate's dramatic. Like it's extremely high and it's going very fast. And there are many things that you can do to make that burn rate accelerate. But the best teams, I feel like overall, the ones that can actually maintain performance or anything like that, just focus on minimizing that.
That's option 6. That's topic 6. We got a couple topics, so
yeah. But
if you don't like this, just fast forward.
To the point on climbing, it's since everybody won't be at their limit, there will be a different effect, a halo effect around on the other aspects of the.
I think that is Pete and my biggest advantage is that we're the most evenly matched of all you guys. So we're going to have that, to deal with that the least.
Yeah. The idea in that, I think what Chad's getting at is Brandon could easily push Amber a little bit past where she's comfortable, and Sophia could easily push me past where I'm comfortable, where after hour 4, I'm like, whoa, right? And you lose a lot of time in that last hour because you were just on the limit, where Chad and Pete are going to be like, nope, let's do this at 80%. Let's sweet spot this climb. And because they're so close in watt per kg, or they're going to be, it makes sense for them. They won't push each other.
Yeah.
Cool. Next one. This is a big one. Descending, right? John, who do you think? Pete's the best descender out of us, right? Who's second?
Sophia. But Sophia,
well, duh. Sophia's the best.
Sophia's actually
Sophia's
better
best
than
at everything.
Pete. Yeah, she's better than Pete, I would say, because last year when I did the Soho stage race, the UCI stage race they had in Utah, and she actually was faster than me on some of the descents. So she's a pro, but she's not just a pro; she's a pro.
I wasn't even including her in this because she is the best at all of these things, maybe not the flats, but because she is a current pro too. No offense to Amber, but
none taken.
Yeah. She's training like a pro right now. She's the best at everything.
Yeah.
Great facts.
But outside of Sophia, Pete's the best, I would say. Then I would say, and Amber, I don't know where you're at, but I'm just going to slot you into the middle. Nate, you're second, I would say, behind Pete. After that, I think that Chad and Brandon are probably pretty similar right now. And I think
now.
Amber, I think so. I think that if you worked with Lee McCormick for like one day, seriously, I think it's a good idea and you should do it. If you did that, I guarantee you would slot in, like you would have a faster growth rate because you've just had so much time on a bike, right? And you've had so many different situations that you've faced. So I bet that you would see, like, if you had that sort of thing, it would go up. Nate's looking like that's actually an impossibility, that she shouldn't have a clinic.
Hey, Amber, what mountain bike do you have?
Ooh, I get to ride the new Cannondale Scalpel.
Yeah.
But you don't have a mountain bike, right?
Yeah, I do.
But I mean, it's in your possession. You've ridden it.
Yeah, I have an older model Scalpel.
Oh, I thought you never rode mountain bikes. Do you? How often
Very,
do you ride a
very
mountain
rarely.
bike?
But I have one, and I do ride it occasionally. Yeah.
Oh, I thought Amber just had never ridden a mountain bike descending. So I was worried. So Cape Epic has these like really fast fire road descents with flat off-camber or flat turns. And in my experience, I was actually worried about Amber on this situation because I think has way less fear than me, Brandon, and Chad on descending because you've done so much of it. And if you descend those flat fire roads like a road bike, which is probably engraved in your brain, your front wheel will slip out.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, no. It's a totally different skill set. Completely different. It's a different planet entirely.
But I just don't want, you know what I mean? Like you were like 40, that's no problem. And I don't like, to me, 40 would scare me out of my mind, but I'm just, please be cautious on the descents and don't hurt yourself. But anyways, in this situation, I think descending will go Sophia and I, Chad and Pete, Amber, Brandon.
So one thing about Brandon that's interesting, though, is last year we did 1 or 2 days with Lee McCormick with Brandon, and he just saw so much growth so fast. Like, he just responds so quickly because I think of all the years of athletic stuff that he's done and everything else, and he's got a lot of natural talent, too. He learns those things pretty quickly. So it really, it'll be interesting to see. But I think the descending, the toughest part in my mind, from what I can see from watching Cape Epic stages and looking at everything else and talking to riders who've ridden there, it's the composition of the dirt is really tricky. Like it's almost like if you were to leave out like a snickerdoodle cookie and you left it on your counter for like 2 weeks and it just got completely dry and crumbly. And then after that, you threw on some like chocolate chips and then you tried to like drive your car on top of a marble countertop, right? Like it's just so slippery because the dirt is really weak. So it crumbles and forms dust, and that dust conceals rocks, and it gets really tough to kind of know where you go. So you kind of have to have a level of comfort with a level of discomfort, I guess. Like you have to be okay with not being perfectly sure with what your tires are going to do at all times. So
that was just watching old race footage. You'd see some of the highest level professional riders. I mean, I think what's his name? Sam Gaze.
Mm-hmm.
He crashed out last year because and you watch the crash. It is a dumb crash. It was just, it wasn't even complacency. It was probably just ever changing terrain. You think you've got it dialed, and all of a sudden the conditions are just a little bit different. One little thing goes wrong, concussion ends your race, not just your day.
And you're tired too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's the hard thing. So like it's one thing when you're racing BC bike race and you're tired because like the dirt like does its best to save you, right? Because it's such incredible traction in that sort of environment where you're deep into some effectively a rainforest. But in this case, when you're tired, it gets like exponentially more difficult to be able to maintain composure on the bike because the dirt's doing its absolute best to make you not stay upright. So it's tricky, but riding, the good part is, at least for those in Tahoe, I'm not sure how it is in Vermont, Amber, but Tahoe has dirt that's really similar to that, Reno and Tahoe. It's crumbly, it breaks apart, it's loose. So a lot of the time you'll see riders toward the end of the season not be riding their mountain bikes out on the trails as much because they'll say, oh, the trails are blown out. But in my mind, all of you will get the most bang for your buck in September and October riding the trails here in this region when they're really blown out and they have a ton of use on them because that's what you're going to come across there.
Amber, when you come out here next, we'll have John take us to all the trails he thinks we should be able to ride for Cape Epic, and we'll do a little internal skills clinic even if Lee's not here.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah. I think too in Connecticut, like you guys don't have huge downhills like we have, right?
Not in Connecticut. In Vermont, there's more of that, and the trails are just technical in a completely different way. It's rocks and roots, and like you said, Jonathan, there's not a lot of dry, crumbly stuff. It's more mud and kind of loamy textures. So it's just a totally different beast out here. Completely different kind of technical riding. So yeah, that'll be really awesome.
You can get your skills up really high on that stuff too, especially technical climbing. Not having to unclip on technical climbing will be a huge advantage because there is some of that at Cape Epic.
Totally.
Yeah.
I think that is yet another advantage for Pete and for me is the technical climbing. Because when people talk about technical riding, it's always implied that we're talking about downhill,
descending. Yeah.
And so often the climbs are, and I know we'll be doing some walking. I mean, everybody walks segments of Cape Epic, but the sections that we can stay in the saddle and do it without flailing and wasting a ton of energy, I think Pete and I are both really good at that.
Amber, so where do you think you and Brandon will be in descending skills for all of us?
Somewhere in the middle, maybe. Probably. I mean, we both have the least depth and experience on this front, so it'll just depend a lot on how steep our learning curve is. And I think the key for us is going to be less about absolute skill and more about being able to read the trail enough to know how to ride within our skill set. Because I think that we'll lose more with a crash than we would riding within our skill sets and not pushing it. So I think that that's going to be one of the keys that we're going to have to train is recognizing how far we can actually push and still be in control.
I have something that's really nice is I'll have Sophia in front of me and I can just follow like her tire track in the dirt and you automatically get, as long as there's not too much dust, the best line, which is really important. So next, flats. This goes hands down to Chad and Pete. Two big riders, two big high FTPs. I could easily hurt Sophia. Actually, then probably afterwards is actually going to be Amber and Brandon because they both will have higher FTPs. I will give Sophia a really good draft, but I feel like she doesn't need to rest on the flats. She should be pulling me on the flats.
Yeah, and she's really small. She's like a very small person, so she doesn't have that much mass, and as a result, her FTP isn't she isn't like 360 watts or wherever Pete and Chad will be, right?
Yeah.
Her powder weight ratio is great, but at the same time, she's also very good and capable. She rides with Rose Grant, who she was her teammate when she was on the previous team last year, and now she's on the Cliff team. She was on the Stance Pivot team, and Rose actually is a pretty tall athlete. I think she may even be slightly taller than Amber, so she's had a pretty high threshold. And then also Sophia rides a lot with Keegan and Ryan, so she's used to riding behind high FTP riders on flats and learning to how precious and important it is to stay so precisely within the draft. So she may actually do well in that case, Nate. She's kind of trained for it.
Yeah, but Rose Grant is 173 centimeters, 5'8". So
she's taller.
Amber, you're 5'11".
5'10".
Is that correct? 5'10".
Yeah, I think Rose is 5'10". I could be wrong, but I feel like she's the exact same height as me. So, but yeah.
Next one, grit. I'm going to say this is a wash between all of us. If we want to, we can be super gritty. Right? Agree?
Oh, yeah.
Everyone's just, this is a podcast, guys. You got to talk. Everyone's just shaking their head, yes.
Sorry.
Okay.
Drinking water.
There's no distinct grittiest set of riders amongst us.
Yeah.
I think we all bring much to the table on this front.
Can we cover something on the opposite end of this in kind of a respect? There's grit, but then there's also kind of like the social dynamic. I don't know if you're going to get into that into your point. I think it's 8 on here, Nate. But I think that there's grit, which kind of like everybody's working together, sticking together, maintaining intensity for the the duration that needs to happen, whatever else. But then there's also like the chance that you guys don't work together and that the teams don't, that you're upset at each other, that you aren't getting along, that you're frustrated with each other, because you're going to be in quite a lot of duress going through the whole thing. And I think with Chad and Pete, this one is like 100% solid. Like you guys, I have zero question about everything being fine and you guys towing the line together.
Pete was the make or break factor in this whole thing. I wasn't going to do it with anybody else. So it was either Pete or no.
Mm-hmm. And then Brandon and Amber, I know that Brandon absolutely hates losing so much, and it puts him in a sour mood if he is not doing really well. So...
hates it.
Hates
Enjoy
it.
that.
Yeah. So, and Amber, I know that you are fiercely competitive, but I don't know. Then again, I think like you've ridden with teams and you've ridden with a specific role to kind of be like a helper for people in so many races. So I feel like I would like select Amber as like the teammate in a lot of ways, because like she'd probably be so motivational and going through with that. So that could be good.
She'll be Brandon's therapist.
Yeah, right? Exactly. Yeah. And then with Nate and Sophia, Sophia is from Argentina, and she is a fiery woman with strong convictions. And Nate, you're a very opinionated person, but you also are very good at getting along with people as well. So
I'm mellow during races. I think we talked about this. She said Rose Graham was like this too, very like calm during the race. So when Sophia was freaking out or with mechanical, she was just calm, and it said it helped her. So I make jokes. You watch the videos on YouTube. I make jokes like 2 laps to go. I'm not in a crazy attack headspace. So I think we'll be good. We'll be yin and yang.
In our group chat that we have with Ryan and Keegan and stuff, Nate, there have been we have bets that like bikes will be thrown. So in your partnership. So so we'll have to see where that goes. That'll be an interesting thing, because it's going to be so hard. We remember this from doing single track 6 that there's a stage race, but then there's the mountain bike aspect of things where just everything becomes more complex, and there's crashing, and your teammate leads you down a bad line, and then you end up crashing, and then that teammate does it again and again and again, and it's so there's a lot of things to consider with that.
Okay, heat. This is a huge one. I think I'm very good in the heat. Amber, you're good in the heat?
If I'm acclimated, I adapt really, really well to heat acclimation, but I'm going to need to do some intentional acclimation to get ready for this. Just for sure.
7 days before, listen to that podcast we did. And then Chad, this has been, I think based on the knowledge we learned yesterday, Chad's going to change this, but historically Chad's been pretty bad in the heat with cramping. Is that right, Chad? Terrible. Yeah. And then Pete's been pretty good. Brandon's a mix. Depends if he drinks or not. If he doesn't drink, he doesn't do well. And I'm pretty sure Sophia's great in the heat.
She's it's something that she has struggled with what she perceives as like kind of like a relatively like low sweat rate. But I know she's been focusing on that over the past little bit. I'm sure she will focus on it for this, and I think she'll get it figured out. So
it's going to be our team win.
Nate's not competitive, by the way.
This is the biggest thing. This and the next point is the recovery day to day. And I think Cape Epic, and actually this is why Sophia first said she's like, Nate will be great at this, is it is an eating contest, right? In between, because getting to the place, doing the event, and then getting back to where you're staying or in the tents, it is a lot, like you don't have much time to eat a whole bunch of food. I think Brandon's pretty good at eating a ton after the race, not before the race, after the race. I think Chad has a problem eating a ton of food. Right, Chad?
Yeah, I think so. But I'm going to work on that between now and then. For one thing, I've already been fueling my workouts a bit differently, trying to build a bigger, if you will, carbohydrate tolerance. And I've got a lot of time to work with. And I do recognize that the demands are highly glycolytic, and this is going to be something I have to have down pat by the time I get there. So I'm not worried about this aspect of it.
And then Pete and Amber can eat, right?
Yeah.
Amber,
yeah.
Pete's got it.
Yeah.
He's dialed there.
And I know we've been on this for a while, but so on that one, probably disadvantage Chad and Pete, and then split even between Sophia and I, and Amber and Brandon.
I wouldn't say a split. Brandon has had a really big problem with nutrition and he's admitted that. I can't help but think that he probably would still be racing pro triathlon if he was, fueling right at that time period, because he probably would have had a lot of success. So I would put it actually as Amber and Brandon being at a disadvantage relative to you. But it can totally change, because like you said, Chad, if it's worked on, you can adapt quickly and get better at it.
And this is about eating in the event too. Amber, you're the most experienced stage racer. How important over multi-events is it to be like eating during the actual event?
It's absolutely crucial. I mean, there's just no way around it. You can't really make up for you need to try to stay ahead on calories as much as you can, which gets to a point during a stage race where that's actually impossible. So the earlier and more often you eat, and you can stay on top of that and kind of stave off that depletion, the better, because it's really, really hard to make up for that in any meals after the race is over, or after each stage each day. So the before and after is important, but the during is even more important.
You kind of want to have the least amount of deficit over the stage race compared to your other racers.
Yeah, exactly.
One thing about that, because it's mountain biking, so it's a lot harder to eat because of just the fact that the times that you can take in your nutrition safely is limited. Who's planning on using hydration packs here versus just bottles? Is everybody hydration pack?
Both.
Both,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Both.
It's probably, I think having drinkable calories is an important thing, because that way you make sure that when you're taking stuff in between quick moments, when you have that little, the nozzle right there, you're at least getting some calories with that too.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay, this next one, this is probably going to be the deciding factor. Multi-day events. And in my brain, this is huge advantage for Amber and Brandon. Sophia's good, probably just at their level, but I am totally unproven, untested. I can do 2-hour workouts in a row, but not multi-day events. And then I think Pete and Chad, you've done a little more multi-day events than me, but you're not to the level of Amber or Brandon for doing big stage races.
No, I've done pretty well in 3 and 4 day races. I'm untested beyond that. Single track 6 was the closest opportunity I've had, but I only did 3 of the 6 days.
Yeah. And Amber, this is like, how many big stage races did you do of 7 days?
I couldn't even count, but this is my bread and butter. This is my bread and butter. This is my jam.
And Pete's probably pretty decently prepared at this, in the sense that he's done like Tour of America's Dairyland, and he's done Gastown that whole week when you're racing just crit after crit. Speed week. Yeah, so he's probably fairly prepared with something like that.
Shorter days, but it's still racing back to back. So this is where I don't want to do this to Sophia, where like on day 5 we lose 3 hours because I blow up. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's the worst.
Yeah. Can we talk about that really quick, Nate, on the losses, like in terms of like measuring the difference between the team that wins?
Oh yeah.
Versus the team that gets, what was it? What were you looking at, first to second place or?
First to second place, it was like a 30-minute difference, but over the time that was like 1.5% difference, I believe, in time, and that equaled a quarter mile per hour faster over like for the whole thing, just 1/4 mile per hour faster. And looking at the results is that I think that the top group, they actually ride as a group. And then one day the second place team had a 30-minute like delay, and it was probably either a crash, a bad day, or a mechanical. But just to think about how small that is, like 1.5%, what if you could need to send 1.5% faster? Can you put out 1.5% faster, more power? Can your tire choice increase that, the hydration? It's just such a small margin over the 33 hours or something we're going to race, or more. It's crazy to think about it that way.
Absolutely is. Yeah, super cool point, I think. And I think that the best way to think about this in terms of stage racing, Amber, I don't know if you have this sort of experience, but it's when you're in those situations where you could lose a whole lot more than 1.5%. It's, instead of panicking, it's finding out how to make that that moment right then 1.5% better, right? Like just constantly looking at improving. Is that the right mindset, or
it goes both ways? It's the constant improvement. Like, can you get a little bit more out of yourself in this moment? Can you get a little more out of yourself on this climb? But it's also the other way around. Like, when things go wrong, can you prevent more of a loss? Can you minimize the loss and stave off 1%? And there's countless examples of this, and there's so many things that can go wrong, but staying calm and cool and collected, which is so much easier said than done, especially, I mean, it's easy like when you're sitting on the couch and you're imagining like, oh yeah, if this goes wrong, I'll be fine. And that goes wrong, I'll be fine. But when you're in it, the emotions are running high, you're low on glycogen. It's a totally, totally different animal. And I'll talk about that in a little bit too, when we talk about stage racing tips.
Yeah.
John, you had an equipment suggestion.
Yes.
Because equipment aside, everyone should know this. If you don't finish the day, you can't start the next day. And if one of your teammates doesn't make it, but you do make it, there is a solo competition. You could just do the thing by yourself to finish, which is nice. So if one of your teammates crashes out, you can still finish the race. But how awful would it be to have an hour into the second day, you have a mechanical where you cannot finish the race or you can't get to a spot to fix it. So John, you had some tips on that, I think.
Yeah, I was just going to ask about, well, first things first, like tires are probably the most common mechanical that we see happening with mountain biking, especially it looks like some really sharp, nasty rocks kind of hide under that dust, and it's pretty easy to get a puncture. And I was going to ask if any of you were planning on running tire inserts as like a preventative measure against pinch flats.
I've never gotten a pinch flat, but can't you ride on tire inserts after your rim is
it'll
your
help.
tire's flat?
It'll help. It's not going to be like normal. It's not like a run flat on a car necessarily. It's definitely, you're still, it's compromised and it does compromise the wheel, but it could help. The big thing I've found is that it completely, at least for me with cross country riding, I think that I've just started running them, and I've intentionally hit rocks very hard where I would normally definitely get some sort of a pinch flat, and I've had nothing. And the weight difference is nothing. So I'm running PTN, I think is the brand, or Pepe's Tire Noodles. It's like they're from Europe, I think from Germany. They're extremely lightweight. I know Cushcore makes an XC one, but it weighs more, and it seems like more of a hassle to install. It may work better. I just don't know. But
I'm sure I'm not the only person wondering this, but what are they? I don't even know what they are.
Yeah, so basically with tubeless tires, you usually just have the tire and the rim and some sealant inside, right? And then a big air chamber. But these inserts, with the ones that I have, they look like a pool noodle, so to speak, but they're closed cell foam. So the sealant doesn't absorb into it. And it's a pretty small diameter. So it's going to take up something like 1/3 to 2/3 of the volume of your tire, depending on the volume that you have. And it simply just sits within your tire, and it doesn't move around or anything like that. It kind of gets pinched by the tire, so it stays in place. But then when you slam a rock and the tire wants to pinch between your rim, it won't get that sort of snake bite pinch flat that we're all used to seeing. Instead, it stops that.
Okay. Thank you. 2 questions then. Rolling resistance, and I imagine they're very lightweight, but weight.
Yeah, they can be heavy. I think that the ones that I have, I want to say they're somewhere around like 120 grams for the set. When you like carry them on your hand, you basically can't feel the weight. They feel extremely light, so that may be overestimated. I haven't weighed them. But there are some that are more heavy duty, and they will have more of a weight penalty. They also make tire changes more of a pain. So if you're changing tires regularly, that would be annoying. But in terms of rolling resistance, I'm not entirely sure, because in many cases, it's actually not making any contact with the top of the tire. There's a lot of space of air in between that tire insert and then the top of the tire. So as a result, you're dealing with less overall volume, so like a more progressive ramp rate, if that makes sense. But you're not going to have a situation where I think that it would affect the rolling resistance adversely, just because of the fact that it's not making any contact.
Okay. And then how does it affect the tire's handling capability, though?
It really positively, actually, in most cases. So it allows you to run less pressure, and then your tire is more compliant. And then when you can run less pressure and get more compliance, that allows you to basically just decrease rolling resistance effectively. That's the assumption. And I can only call it an assumption because I feel it and it feels faster, but I haven't seen any tests that prove any sort of decrease in rolling resistance. But
how much less pressure?
So I usually run 18 and 19 PSI in my tires, and I run 2.25 Aspens, and they are on NVM 525, so 25 millimeter internal width. And with my tire inserts, I'm down to 13 and 14 PSI.
Whoa.
Which is crazy. And it gives me a very similar feeling to what I had. So with the 18 to 19. And the big difference that I notice is when I'm going through like Amber, I'm thinking like Connecticut sort of stuff where you've got roots and rocks and all. That's where it's such a huge help, is when you're going over those roots and rocks and the constant little bumps. It just smooths things out, and traction is insane. It's a way to take like your XC tire traction and just really boost it up. So
another reading about people's problems with Cape Epic, cracking a rim, it ends your race, right? So this would be probably a really good thing for us all to do. They're really cheap too, right, John?
Yeah, I think that. Well, I mean, they're overpriced for what they are, sure, because they're just like foam. But I think that they're like around $50 to $70.
Whoa!
So for a set, it's insane, right? Yeah.
That is insane.
But in terms of if you compare it to the cost of a rim and a trip to South Africa, it's a really cheap insurance, so to speak. And you're right. I've noticed that. That is strange, right? Like with Cape Epic, I've noticed a ton of cracked wheels. Like it's a common failure that I see.
Because you can't see the rock because it's in a bunch of dust. So I just want to summarize this, and then Amber's going to give us a whole bunch of stage racing tips for this, which is I'm really excited about, and I hope they're legit. And she doesn't like wink at the camera, and I don't notice it.
She's throwing out bad tips.
Don't drink until the morning of. So inside of this, my prediction is we will actually be faster on a normal day, but the multi-day events, that is where it could go either way to any of us, and that is going to be the key thing. But in general, Sophia and I are going to be faster by a little bit on the descents. I still think we're going to be a little bit faster on the climbs because I'm planning on getting that 380 FTP, and then the flats. There's not really that many flats. I think there's always a little bit of climbing, a little bit downhill. Your guys' predictions, please.
I'll go first. I can't bet against Sophia, so she's a good friend.
She'll kill you.
She'll kill me, but also,
or me. I'm your boss.
Yeah, true. Yeah, and I can't go against you. You signed some checks, so. But at the same time, I actually do think that you guys will end up being the best, and the reason for that is because I foresee, so all of this could change, and I'm eager to see how Brandon is riding. If Brandon is riding really well, technically speaking, very comfortable with mountain biking and very good in where he's at, I think that my vote will have to switch. But as of now, with where it's at, my money is on you because, Nate, you are very descending with you. I find that your technical ability is, from everything that I see, granted I haven't ridden Cape Epic, but you're very much already prepared for something like that. Like, for those that are listening to this, I know that you probably think that Nate is the bad descender that you saw in the mountain bike video or anything else like that. He's not. He is good. So I have to put my money on you guys for that. And it's not because you're going to pull time on the descents. It's because it'll just make everything else easier for you.
We'll pull time on the descents too, though. I mean, you can take 10 minutes on a descent on one of the, easy. John, you just probably cursed us because you just told Brandon he couldn't do it. And Brandon's much like me. So Brandon's going to be just working, he will mountain bike like a crazy man now.
I think he's already there. And we're also, after I move, we'll be pretty close to Brandon, and we're really close to some great trails. And every Saturday we have planned to go do a ride. So, yeah.
You just told Jordan he's not showing up, right? So he's just I'm going to turn it on now.
Yes. Last dance.
Amber, what's your thought?
Well, I have a hard time with this, and I don't like counting my chickens before they're hatched. And I honestly feel like this could go to any one of the three teams. And I really don't want to count Chad and Pete out of this because they are so in sync. And like we said, there's a lot less disparity between the two of them. And I think that that's really going to play into their favor. But I really think Brandon and I have a shot. So, and I know because we've chatted, we're both going to throw everything we've got at this. So I'm going to leave my answer at that.
If Amber trains like she used to, 20 to 30 hours a week, I think we're in trouble. Yes. But Amber, you're not going to do that, right?
says her boss.
You got a full-time job too. With Pete and Chad, yeah, exactly.
Special project, Amber.
I think their advantage will be it'd probably be easy for. If Sophia and I and Brandon and Amber are on a climb and we're half wheeling each other and we do that for 3 days, and then the weaker links on both teams in situations crumble, and then Chad and Peter are at 80% and they're just tortoise us, right? So one day I lose 2 hours and then Chad and Peter just boop, 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 and go by us. So the consistently awesome and never having a bad day. That's where I think their benefit is. So Chad, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, small tweak on that is consistency is paramount. First off, I think 80% every day is exactly what we're aiming for. I think we may have said that very thing, and I'm planning for one bad day. So I really think there's going to be a day in there where we're going to have a mechanical, or just one of us is going to be a little flat. or too hungover. I'm kidding, because we're not drinking. I swear to God, we're not. Not until after. No, real. That's real. But this is like picking a Grand Tour winner at the outset of a Grand Tour, and you can look at all the performance measures. You can look at previous performance. You can say, this rider's on form, coming into form, and you can make all these predictions. But the fact is, there are so many variables at play. I don't feel good about making an estimate. I can only guess based on performance capability. And in that case, I think it's a wash between Amber's team and Nate's team. I think you guys are closely matched in so many ways, and performance-wise, you guys should beat both Pete, my team with Pete. Mm-hmm. However, there are just so many variables, so many moving pieces that it's impossible to say. So all I'm aiming for is good performances consistently across the 8 days, accepting that one of those days is not going to be great and might cost us a hefty amount of time.
I think too, we'll learn a lot when Amber comes out to pre-ride or to do the training camp with us. And if you're dropping me on every climb, I've got a lot of work to do or weight to lose or something. I just hope that too, that we don't have any very bad crashes that then hurt us or take us out. And we don't have any bad mechanicals. I'm sure one of us is going to get a flat tire, but I hope it's just in a way that we can fix it. And if that happens, it's going to be a really fun competition. I can't wait to have the poo-poo talking continue. It's in March, so we got some time left.
If you're watching,
Amber,
1 second really quick. If you're watching live on YouTube right now, cast your votes right now. Just let us know in the comments and say which team is going to win. And then also, please give us a thumbs up if you're watching too. That'll make it so that more cyclists.
Nothing feels trash talk better than that. So
please go ahead.
I did this on Instagram, and it was like, what was it? 75% said Brandon and Amber.
Yeah.
But Amber does not descend on a mountain bike, and it's going to be important.
When you asked why, they just said Amber, right? That was their answer.
That was the reason, Amber. Or they said that because they said a Brandon's watt kg, but like that, it's nullified. He can't, unless he pushes, and I don't think, we'll see if he can technically push for many, many days and still be okay to do that and not crash into Amber and take you guys both out.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Amber, let's get into some stage race tips.
Yeah. So I think we've covered these in different pieces and from different approaches in other episodes. So I want to take just kind of like a bigger, higher level look at what it takes to do a stage race and prepare for one. And a wise person in my life once was talking about the process of hiring somebody for a new job. And the criteria that she offered were, number one, can they do the work? Will they do the work? Can I stand being around them while they do the work? And honestly, there's a lot of truth in that. And that really applies in stage racing, and especially with multi-day events, especially when you're working with a team, this is huge. So the first one is, can you do the work? This is all about preparation. This is when you put the hay in the barn. This is building out your capacity to handle a multi-day event. So you're working on the mental, the physical, the emotional, and the logistical. So you need to prepare logistically, in addition to preparing your fitness, your performance, mental and emotional state, training all of those things so that you can handle that. That's about building your capacity and training yourself to be able to handle what you're going to be tackling during the event. Then the next one is, will you do the work? So this is about execution. So once you get to the event, it is all about execution. Hay is in the barn. There's no more preparing. There's no more building your fitness. There's no more training your gut. You should have all of that dialed and prepared. So now it's about exploiting the capacity that you built through the preparation. And then the last one is, can you stand being around each other while you do the work? And this is going to be a really important one for us. This is an important one when you're racing within a team. But if you're racing by yourself in a multi-day event, this is about, can you stand being around yourself while you do the work for a whole day? And let's be honest, this is kind of hard, especially when you're in the middle of an event and things are not going well, or you don't feel good. It's a totally different ballgame because, let's face it, your brain is awash in very different chemicals. You're in the middle of a race. So learning how to be your own best ally and your own best cheerleader in a race is really important. And then if you're in a team environment, it's learning how to be a good teammate for the people that you're working with. So for me, I need to figure out what makes Brandon tick and vice versa. And we need to figure out not only, okay, yeah, I want to be a supportive teammate, but I need to figure out what kind of support Brandon needs, because that would be really different from me racing with Pete or racing with Chad or racing with Nate. So those things get really, yeah, those things are really, really important. And I want to walk back to kind of on the day, the execution component of this, because I think when it comes to execution, the preparation, you know the distances you're going to be racing, you know kind of what the intensity is going to be. You can build your body up to a point to be able to handle that kind of a workload in terms of KJs. You can practice your nutrition and get it dialed. You can plan out all your travel and logistics. But when you're actually at the event, that execution really is about the mental game and your recovery. Because hopefully you've already planned out the logistics to the point where you have some redundancy in there. If something goes wrong, you can handle it pretty quickly. But the mental game and being on point with recovery are really, really important. The mental game, I really do think Brandon and I have, I mean, this isn't about grit or anything like that, but this is just sort of that experience of having been there and been to those really, really dark places in the recesses of your mind when you're in the middle of a really, really long multi-day event. And there's a term, or just sort of like a way of thinking about this in behavioral economics, which is the planner brain versus the doer brain. So when you're preparing for an event, you can imagine the race, you can imagine all these scenarios, and you can plan for how you're going to handle them, how you're going to tackle each stage. And then you get there. And then here you are, your brain's washing very different chemicals, you are tired, your glycogen's depleted, and how do you handle and execute on your plan when you're actually working with a very different brain at that point? And I think the Mike Tyson quote, again, we've said this before, everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the face. So this is where, what do you do when you get punched in the face? And I really, really think that the experience helps here, because it's kind of like when anybody listening to this has probably had the experience where you've dug really, really deep on an interval that you didn't think that you could do and you actually nail it. To get to that point of nailing it, you kind of have to go to a new and different part of your mind. And once you've been there, like the first time you confront that part of your mind, it can be a little unsettling. But then once you've been there and come back, it's like accomplishing or tackling a level of a video game, right? Like now you know where the bosses are, you know how to defeat them, and you also know maybe how to avoid certain trapdoors that take you into darker places, or how to find bonus lives. And when you get to those points and you actually come back from it, it's like a freaking superpower, right? Like the fact that you know you can do this thing, it calls into question all the other things that you didn't think that you could do. And all of a sudden you have this superpower of like, hey man, maybe I'm actually capable of doing a hell of a lot more than I thought I was, because I proved myself wrong on this one thing. So the feeling that you get from like pushing through an interval that you didn't think you could do is one level. There's a totally different level of mind that you go to when, like, as an example, one of my first European stage races, after the very first stage, like in the middle of the first stage, I was like, I'm not physically capable of finishing this. This is too intense. I can't go another 50K. This is insane. And then I make it across the finish line. And it's like, okay, I just barely finished that stage and I have 7 days left. Like, there's no way I can do this tomorrow. And then you get up and you do it again. And then you find yourself in the middle of that second stage going, I have 6 days left. And that's a very different level of mind that you go to. So I think that's one of the things where Brandon and I will have some advantage, but it's not to say that everybody else, I mean, like we said, everybody involved here has a lot of grit. So I think it'll be interesting. But when it comes to multi-day races, this is like a huge part of the execution component. And then pacing is a big part of this, like mentally pacing yourself for the event and understanding that you have to kind of pace your emotions and your mental approach as much as you need to pace yourself physically, because it's going to take a lot out of you cognitively and emotionally to get through an event like that. So those are the mental game pieces. And then on the recovery game, we've talked about this a lot. Pacing yourself in the first place, so not putting yourself at an unnecessary deficit is important, and then minimizing your cognitive load. Again, a lot of that is putting the hay in the barn to begin with. So managing your logistics and your planning and your support, and then managing your emotions. How are you going to handle setbacks and pressure when you go to those darker levels of mind, if you will? And then we talked about this earlier too, nutrition, super important, making sure that you're eating. You just don't want to get behind on this because there's some level of deficit that's going to be inevitable. And then as much as you can minimize that, it'll be to your advantage. And then sleep is huge. So this has a lot to do with core temp, making sure that you have good sleep hygiene going into the race. If your sleep hygiene is dependent upon a routine that you can only execute at home and you can't take with you on the road, that's going to be problematic. So making sure that all of your routines are very portable, that you can take them with you comfortably wherever it is you're going to be racing. Those are all really important things. But those are just some of the bigger picture things I thought would be worth touching on today. I don't know. Any other thoughts or questions?
One thing to think about on this is that, so between me and you are so much better, Amber, at that long thing, the multi-day stay thing. And then Brandon, he's actually going to be racing 1 watt per kg less than his threshold. So it's for him, instead of being on like 80% every day, or if you're racing 80%, it's going to be like 60% for every day for him. Mm-hmm. So it should be a lot easier. You can think about how much you weigh in kilograms and then subtract that from whatever your wattage would be. And it should be, as long as he eats and drinks and doesn't get dehydrated, he should be fine on the multi-day stuff. And the same for Sophia. She should be fine because it's not as big a difference, but still probably 0.5. And that's enough to make it a lot easier. So it's really me and you, Amber, for multi-days.
What if Sophia's like riding around with like no hands? Like
I know.
Like doing a creative braid hairstyle while she rides?
The votes are in. I know. I'm going to just do this descent on my front tire.
Yeah, exactly.
The votes are in, and actually, it's not that Amber and Brandon win, but just Amber wins.
Yes.
People are voting just Amber.
Yeah.
But Amber and Brandon
Thanks,
are
guys.
number 1. Number 2 are Chad, Pete. And number 3 are Sophia and I, which is pretty annoying because what you're really doing is voting me down, because we all know if it was just a single person race, Sophia would beat all of us.
Oh, yeah.
Even Brandon.
Crush us.
Because I looked at times. Or Sophia would beat Brandon on a real mountain bike race, like an Epix Ride race.
Oh, yeah.
Sophia every time.
Oh, yeah.
No question. So
She's fast.
thanks, everyone.
But this is the sort of stuff that it fires Nate up. I was just gonna say, if you guys keep saying third place, is a good way to guarantee that he does not get third place. So yeah,
maybe that's what they're trying to do. They know you, Nate. They know you too well.
Yeah,
possibly. Well, let's transition. It's kind of timely since we're talking about stage racing and long races, long efforts. Tom's question. He says, "Hey trainers, I might have a strange question, but I couldn't research an answer, so maybe you can tell me. I tend to bonk." I like how he says I tend to bonk. And he says a couple other small things just in the verbiage here that are funny. He says, "I'm not sure why, but it happens from time to time." So just fantastic. So he says, "When that happens, usually after about 3 hours, I struggle to come home, to be laying on the floor for 1 to 2 hours to come back to life and unable to eat and with some pretty nasty nausea. At the time, I swear never to let that happen again, but I forget about it usually the day after, and when my resting heart rate is still through the roof, and I feel a lot of fatigue. But is there also some sort of positive to this? Could it be that my body needs bonking from time to time in order to build resistance to it? Could that build up glycogen stores or enhance my fatty oxygenation?" I think he may mean oxidation. We're not sure. But he says, "And if yes, how often should I bonk?" I can never think of like advising somebody bonk this many times per month, right? He says,
it's coaching 101.
Yeah, yeah. Chad's like sweet spot, then bonk. Yeah. Says,
Spot till you bonk.
He says, "Thanks in advance. Love the podcast. Listen to it almost every day." Awesome, Tom. Appreciate you sending in the question. Chad, probably best to have you kick us off on this.
Yeah, I actually love this question because we've all faced this, and the logic behind it is solid. I mean, anytime we look for training adaptation, we have to have a stimulus that causes that, right? We have to disrupt homeostasis in some way. The whole idea of that which does not kill us makes us stronger. So this should be one of those things, right? And glycogen depletion is effective and it is necessary. It is one of the stimuli for change. It will trigger that adaptation we seek. This, however, I don't think is the best way to go about it. Short answer, is there some positive to it? Yes. Could it be that the body needs bonking? No, it doesn't need to be pushed to those extremes. So briefly, I'd like to just define what a bonk is for those who aren't familiar with this particular nomenclature or may think they know what a bonk is, but maybe you've never actually been there. And it's more common than you might think. So physiologically, it's a depletion of our muscle glycogen, so the sugar that's stored in the muscle. And I say depletion in quotes if you're watching, because we can't really deplete muscle. I mean, there's still, I think I've seen the lowest levels of muscle glycogen fall to maybe 30%, maybe as low as 20%. And this is actually a trainable thing, and I'll get to why that is trainable in a little while. But it's the idea behind it is that there's a peripheral limitation, peripheral meaning in the muscles. So we're limited by what our muscles can store. When they run out of energy, we can do no more. But just as a brief aside, consider what happens when we truly run out of energy. If there isn't any glycogen in the muscle, if there isn't any ATP available to the muscle fibers, there's one outcome, and it's rigor. I mean, if we don't have ATP to actually release the muscle contraction, we stay in that contracted state. We're clearly not going there. So energy shortage.
Nate kind of shrugged.
Well,
like
honestly, there's an interesting aside to that aside is there's implications with cramping here. So it's got me thinking. It's nothing I want to discuss today because the gears are turning. I haven't got any answers though. So energy shortage limits our capacity for work. It's really that simple. We run out of energy, we can't do more work. And there's a couple models to explain why that is. One of them, and it's I don't know that it's debunked, but it's strongly argued against the catastrophe models of exercise physiology, which some of the criticisms of how we don't come up against this catastrophic muscular failure. You know, why when we run out of glycogen, we don't just. The reason this doesn't hold up, but two arguments against it are hypoxia. So you go to a high altitude and you can't perform at the same level. That has nothing to do with muscle glycogen. You go out and try to work in heat, especially heat with which you're unfamiliar, high levels of heat, and you experience heat exhaustion, which can push into heat stroke and can get very dangerous. Nothing to do with glycogen. So if glycogen limitation in the muscle is the only threat, how do we explain these things? And if you look at Tim Noakes, and the science on this, or the theory behind this, is quite old, and it's still standing up pretty well. We're talking a good 15 years ago, is that, like I just mentioned, muscle ATP is never reduced below 50% of resting values. I mean, at our worst, we can only push ourselves, according to Noakes, and yes, this is old, maybe has been updated since then, but we can't push ourselves to less than half empty. We simply can't get there. So again, this catastrophe model doesn't hold up. This peripheral limitation model doesn't hold up. And then finally, and this ties it in really well to what Amber was just talking about with her mental game, is that post-bonk, I mean, you can be in a really terrible state, but if it came down to it, you could probably still muster one hard last effort. You could muster a sprint. And on to a lesser degree, what happens when you're out riding and you're in a dark place, but you see the top of the climb, you see the finish line, you see that opponent who has been, you know, your primary motivation start to slip, start to fall off pace, and you recognize, oh, he's hurting. Where does this come from? You don't suddenly have more muscle glycogen available. There's something else going on. When you hear that right song at the right time, you add caffeine into the equation. All these things fly in the face of glycogen being the single limitation. So physiologically,
Yeah. I was just going to say,
it's not the only.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that, because there have been so many times where I was utterly convinced I had nothing left in the tank after maybe covering a big attack at the end of a race, and I think, okay, that's it, my job's done. And then I see my teammate who's supposed to do the next thing, and she's boxed in, and I'm literally the only person who can do it. Somehow, it's there. And yes. It's like, if you had asked me 5 seconds earlier, I would have said there was no way, physically impossible. And yet, when it comes down to it, boom, it's there.
It's absolutely possible. Yep. So, and that's a perfect segue into the psychological explanation of what's going on. So the idea here being that the brain subconsciously, it's something we think about, restricts the amount of work that we can do. And it bases this on past experience and future expectations. There's a term called teleo-anticipation. Google it. It's interesting stuff. But this boils down to, instead of that peripheral limitation, now we're talking about a central limitation. So now the brain is what's deciding what limits us in terms of what we can and cannot do. So this model states that, or conveys that muscle recruitment is limited. So our brain, we're centrally governed, and hence it's called the central governor model, if they're still using that term. And it does this because it's a protective mechanism. It recognizes what the body has tolerated, it anticipates what the body could tolerate, and then it sets some limits so that we can't exceed these extents. Whether it's physiological and it's in the periphery, whether it's psychological and it's in the brain, it seems to be the consensus, as much as you can have a consensus in a scientific environment, is that it's really just, and this leans more towards the central model, is that it's a combination of afferent feedback, and this is the information that comes from the muscle. So it's the stimulus to the central nervous system, in combination with the efferent, which is the reply or the response from the central nervous system, which can affect the number of muscle fibers recruited, the amount of force developed, the rate of that force development. All of this leans more towards central limitation than peripheral, just what we were talking about. Even though the muscles feel completely spent, even though you're checked out, I can't possibly do more work physically, you can though. You always can.
It's almost like our bodies know that we would make really bad decisions if it was left up to us.
Yeah,
that's exactly what it's like. That's a perfect way to sum it up. Exactly. So yes, the muscles are depleting, and there is the agreement is simply that this depletion isn't the sole shot caller. It's not the one thing. It's not just glycogen depletion. There are too many other things at work. And really, glycogen depletion is almost a oxymoron. So all this in mind, let me just close with this, or close this section. Does it matter? I mean, we run low on glycogen, we hit the wall regardless. So we know this. So it doesn't matter if it's centrally governed. It doesn't matter if it's peripherally managed. The fact is, when we run too low on sugar to unfamiliar depths, our body shuts down, and we don't have really any say in the matter past that point.
I'm going to run some scenarios by you, Chad, and I want you to say bonk or no bonk, so to speak. Okay. So start out at the beginning of a crit, and I go, and I've eaten normally, done everything like normal, and I go first lap out hard from the gun in the crit. I don't know who would ever do something like that. Certainly not me. Yeah. But go hard from the gun, and then 2 or 3 laps later, I blow up. Bonk or no bonk?
Yeah, it's definitely a no bonk. The fuel's still on board. You just push too hard, and I think this is the problem. People throw that term around so often that, I mean, it's kind of a silly term, right? Bonk. It's probably in the dictionary by now, but the fact is, it's not terribly scientific in nature.
Mm-hmm. Nate, you were going to say something?
You do that almost every crate. Just know if John's racing, almost every time.
He's the king of the 3-lap bonk.
That's it. 3-lap bonk. Yep, that's it. Why not do the dumb move? We'll see. Sometimes it works, huh? Spoken like a smart person. So along those lines, though, and we'll stop with the bonk, no bonk game, but stretching that out, I think a lot of people, the point I'm trying to make is many times you think you have bonked, but you haven't. It's because you've just outpaced your abilities for a specific time period or something to that degree. Bonking is something that's pretty different. And once again, it's not running yourself entirely depleted of oxygen, but functionally you are depleted. And that's an important thing to keep in mind. And it takes quite a ways to get to that point. And if you have been there, you know, because it's not just fatigue. Like we talked about before, and Amber, I think you mentioned before too. It's like a lack of clarity in your head, and an inability many times to do normal functions, whether that's speaking, whether that's coordination, anything like that. Those things really do start to function or start to fail. I also notice my body rebels, and the very thing it needs, it's going against, and it's telling me, I know that I need to eat and I know that I need to drink, but if I do that, it's like my brain is convinced that it will be just, certain to make it worse. However, that's not the case. I need to take it in. But this is something, at least for me, I've bonked, sure, plenty of times, but I can't think of a single time I've ever bonked with a ride that's been under like 5 hours ever. Like they're always long rides where I've really rammed myself down for a very long time and done way too much and not fueled well. It's not something that just happens on a short ride. So
Amber, have you ever bonked?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Chad?
It sucks.
Yeah, I was going to close with a couple of examples that let me explain some more things, and then I'll try to tie it all together. So I've described what bonking is, so now that you have, I hope, a better understanding of what happens when we bonk, and use of that term should be limited, or maybe limit it to those actual situations. Let me explain why it's not the best way to go about achieving the adaptation you're looking for, Tom. So the consequences of depleting glycogen, or what's often termed as operating in a low energy state, you just don't have the fuel in the tank, are many. I'll run through, geez, I think I've got 8 or 10 of them here, but the first of which is that there are high levels of cortisol. And this is both during and post exercise. And as you've probably heard, that's a catabolic hormone. So it sounds like it's not a desirable thing, but when in exercise, you're in a catabolic state and cortisol is flowing, it's actually a good thing as long as carbohydrates on board, because we need this cortisol to actually break down the fuel sources. It'll break down fat, it'll break down protein for that matter. So the fact is cortisol helps us fuel the work, and it's going to get its fuel from somewhere. So if we run out of carbohydrate, where's it going to come from? Yes, fat is still a resource, but we're probably going to start to dip into that whole protein metabolism and that unfavorable catabolism that people worry so much about, and rightly so. And this is rarely beneficial. And I say rarely because, yeah, maybe there are situations where you do want to metabolize a little bit of upper body mass, for instance. Say you're trying to, become a true T-Rex shaped cyclist and you want to ditch all that upper body mass. Okay, that might be a situation where losing muscle mass is favorable to your performance.
Very desirable aesthetic, that one.
It never looks good, sorry. But muscle is what makes watts, right? And muscle is what burns fat. So if you're sacrificing muscle, well, you're sacrificing power, and you're sacrificing your lipolytic or your fat burning capabilities to some extent. Secondly, there's a decrease in very, very germane, considering the situation right now, is there's a decrease in immunosuppression. So we basically increase our susceptibility to illness and infections. And this lasts for quite a long time. I mean, we're talking 24 to 72 hours post, depending on the depth of the hole you dig. David Nyman recently came to the forefront of, I can't remember what magazine it was in. I think Runner's World or something, but he's an exercise physiologist, and he didn't coin the term, but he cited the term immunometabolism, in that our immunity is tied to metabolism in certain ways. And he sees this, or it is a carbohydrate centric school of thought, in that carbohydrate is necessary for us to maintain high levels of immunity. And if you think about it, immune cells can actually bonk. They're cells like anything else. They do require sugar to function. And if we deplete them of sugar, well, they can't function. So this is why our immune system takes a hit. And this is tied to a couple things in particular, and they're the usual culprits: duration and intensity. So if you're doing long work, you have to be cognizant of the fact that you are repressing or suppressing your immune system. So, address your long rides carefully. Recognize that you probably shouldn't go shaking any hands. I mean, in any circumstances, certainly not these. And then intensity. But the interesting thing about intensity is that you can really run your immune response down with long, hard efforts, long, high intense efforts. But if you break those efforts up with recoveries, it has a huge impact on your immune response. In that, if you work short, take a break, work short, even at really high intensity, you don't take that same immunosuppressive hit. And he worked with, in this case, marathon runners who would actually either run the aid station, walk the aid stations, or take 1-minute walking breaks every mile. I think that's what they did. But the fact is, what they saw in terms of their immune response at the end of the marathon was very different than what the people who gutted out the entire 26.2 miles. Thirdly, so severe depletion of glycogen stores usually comes at the cost of a really slow return to training readiness. Another term for that is training disruption. You're basically pushing on yourself a disruption in your training. It's self-imposed. So there's really no good excuse for that. On top of that, you're going to impact both the timing, because you're probably going to have to push it out, and the quality of the subsequent workouts. When you do finally get back on the bike and you try to do that first high quality workout, I bet you anything, the quality is just not going to be where it would be if you had fueled well.
And confirm.
Yes.
Yeah,
100%. Yep. Yeah.
Okay. Fourthly, there's a threat of dehydration, and that rises with glycogen depletion, because glycogen packs quite a lot of water. And if you're drinking plain water the whole time, I mean, then your performance decreases. So maybe not a big threat, but it does question or call into question the reasoning behind the workout. It affects the quality of it. And on that note, sodium depletion takes place. And I can't think of a situation where sodium depletion is beneficial. So should you engage in water rides, which is actually a good way to approach improving some of the things that you're after, Tom, do include electrolytes, especially if they're on hot rides and rides with low cool and low wind. Fifthly, and from a performance perspective, perhaps the most important of all of these is the impact on your work capacity. I mean, we go out there to do these high quality workouts with the intention of lifting our capabilities, eliciting or pushing an appropriate training response or stimulus, based on our current capabilities. We have to push the boundaries, and we can't do that if we're under fueled. If the gas isn't in the tank, we can't drive the car. And then I think this gets overlooked too frequently is the psychological impact. And I've termed this kind of an associative spiral, in that you start to see these long, hard workouts as, in your case, basically near-death experiences. Why would you ever want to do that again? I mean, going into it, you're already halfway talked out of it because you know how awful this is going to be, and you know how hard the road back is going to be. There's nothing positive psychologically about running yourself to these depths. And then one more small bit is that it's dangerous, plain and simple. This was brought up in our planning meeting, but the fact is, if you've ever truly bonked, you understand that this is dangerous. If you're out on the road and you're in a bonking state, anything can happen. You are very much detached from reality at that point. So
yeah, you cannot make good decisions, dangerous. Let alone react quickly or appropriately.
No,
if you need
literally, the only thing that's ever made sense to me in those circumstances are how much edible, drinkable things can I get in my mouth right now? That's all I care about. It doesn't matter where I find it or what it is. I will eat or drink anything.
Just to reiterate on this is when you call home. This is when you phone a friend.
Yeah.
This is when you do that sort of thing.
For
There's
real.
no pride in pushing through a bonk. No pride at all. It's only hurting you.
It's not productive from a training standpoint, and you're putting yourself and potentially people around you at risk. So yeah, just not generally a good idea.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, and then finally, let's just look at it. So I've said all these things that are negatives about pushing yourself to this point, but let's look at how we can dial it back just a little bit and actually benefit from what it is you're doing. So in this case, we're kind of looking at the risk to reward or the cost to benefit ratio. And I consider it extremely questionable when you run it to extremes. I'm not a fan of extremes. I don't think they're productive. So my point here is that there are better and safer ways to do this. And this is probably the take-home message of all of this. You don't need to push it to this extent, Tom. Rather, you can find ways to achieve everything that you're after and do it safely and far more productively. So glycogen depletion is in fact a stimulus for increasing our ability to store glycogen. So we deplete, and our physiologic response is to allow more storage. But you don't have to bonk to do this. Endurance training by nature does this. Amber?
And there's just a huge difference between glycogen depletion and bonking. So you can do this in a controlled space. It's a matter of degrees, right? Like you can deplete glycogen somewhat, so you're not in that altered mental state where you're really at risk. And that's a different stimulus, and that's a different approach than bonking, where you've depleted yourself so much that now you're essentially useless. Like you're not going to get training benefit. You're not able to make decisions or do anything safely. So I just want to kind of clarify that there's a matter of degree here. And when we say glycogen depletion, it doesn't necessarily mean all the way depleting to the point of bonking.
Yeah, exactly. Degrees of depletion. And also the absence of glycogen or glucose in the bloodstream can in fact lead to greater fat oxidation, but so do so many other things. And they do this by using exactly what Amber just talked about, degrees of depletion. There's long, slow distance. There's low carbohydrate or water rides, ideally with electrolytes at low intensity. There's we've talked about restricting your carbohydrate intake after the ride. In certain circumstances, that can be more beneficial than detrimental. Low intensity work without on-the-fly sugar. So if you get on the bike in the morning to do petit for your umpteenth time, probably don't need to take a gel to get through petit in most circumstances, especially if you're concerned with improving your lipolytic or fat burning capabilities, especially if you're concerned with shedding a little more fat. Also, consider what happens when you do hit that wall and you have to hobble home at 30 or 40% of threshold. It becomes a survival ride, and the productivity of that, even from a fat burning perspective, pales in comparison to having just a little bit of sugar left in the muscles, such that you can ride at 50 or 60% and burn that many more grams of fat per hour during those waiting minutes or hours of your ride. Mm-hmm. And then I hesitate to throw this in there, but I will because it's talked about so often. There's that notion of fat burning in a carbohydrate flame. And honestly, I started digging into the bioenergetics of this again, and I lost interest like I always do because it's almost irrelevant. So maybe I could make sense of it. Maybe there is something to it. I honestly can't speak to that. Maybe you can, Amber, but it almost is beside the point. I'm already convinced sugar is a necessary factor or a necessary component in proper endurance training and performance. Mm-hmm. And then there's also the context too. If you're super focused on fat oxidation and you're trying to go about it through all these extreme measures, in the case of bonking, at the extreme end of things, the science doesn't really support this notion. And I'm looking at you, ketosis or ketogenic diet, because yes, you have this high fatty acid oxidation, but there's super limited applications where that truly is beneficial to performance. This is that whole notion of some is good, so more must be better. But when it comes to us, we have to keep context in mind. Also, we're not the sort of athletes who go out and plod along for hours on end at 60%. Rather, we need to be metabolically flexible. We need to be able to utilize carbohydrate. We need to be able to rely on fat, and we need to be able to vacillate between these two freely. Mm-hmm. And then finally, and this is it, I promise. When we talked about this with our what's our new podcast called, Nate?
Science of Getting Faster.
Science of Getting Faster. Yes. Research does in fact have its limitations. You do have to recognize that lab findings don't always translate or align with real world performance. So what they can replicate in a lab may not be replicable in a race or even outdoors, not as tidily anyway. And that the mechanism doesn't always link to performance. And again, fat adaptation is a perfect example of this. We get really good at oxidizing fat, but does this help us go faster as a road racer or even a time trialist or a criterium racer? Does it help us get on the podium?
Mm-hmm. Amber, you had a really good way of like writing this down from like a clear kind of, it's a great analogy. Could you say that one for us?
Yeah. When I read this question, what I was thinking in my head was, does your car need to run down to empty to build resistance to operating with no gas? Yes. How often should I run my car down to empty? Like, to me, that's kind of what we're talking about here.
It's a useful translation.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess to recap a bit on a lot of that, sure, there are some benefits that can come from running yourself into a depleted state of varying degrees and depleted state of different things. Reliance on fat and that sort of thing can be helpful depending on it. But if you're really looking at aiming for performance, it does not make sense to intentionally run yourself out of carbohydrates. Right, Chad?
Well,
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
and I think it's important to just step back real quick and just say we're looking at this from the performance perspective, right? Like there are really, really constructive applications for a ketogenic diet, for other applications, for other lifestyles, for other situations and issues. But when we're talking about trying to get faster on the bike and chasing that performance goal, trying to get on the podium, racing, this is the perspective that we're taking on this. So we're by no means bashing on any particular diet. And yes, we are big fans of carbohydrate, but again, this is from a very specific context of we want to get faster.
Yeah, full disclosure, I'm a big proponent of fat adaptation, high fat diets, low carbohydrate, high fat, all that. But again, it's contextual. As an endurance athlete, especially an endurance athlete who has to have high glycolytic or sugar burning capabilities, it's not a good fit.
So
right. And if as in this question, if you're talking about, you want to get stronger and faster on the bike, and this is the context in which you're bonking, the bonking itself is probably not going to be super useful toward those ends.
So it doesn't need to be taken to those extremes. Simply doesn't.
Right. The root of Tom's question really is, how do I, is bonking beneficial? So we've covered that, but he also mentioned that he doesn't know why and it happens from time to time. So perhaps we can also send some suggestions on how to avoid that. Any things that we've done. Nate, I think that you put down a tip on here to set a timer to help with fueling.
Yeah. This is what triathletes do. Is your Garmin, you can set a timer. So after so many minutes, it beeps and just tells you to eat. It's super easy because you can forget in a race, especially mountain biking too. It's a lot harder to remember eating. Two, I want to say, someone said in the chat, but I personally think I have never bonked for real. I've been dehydrated. and dehydrated, you get kind of the same feeling, or you get like, and then you get too hot. That happened to Carson City and Leadville, where I didn't have enough water and just dehydrated. And you might think because your watts went down a whole bunch that it was a bonk, but you might have just not had enough water in your system.
Yeah, heat exhaustion, dehydration, these can feel pretty similar.
It's also, I don't know this, but at least in my scenario, it would be pretty rare that I bonked, but then also wasn't in some sort of high risk situation to become dehydrated as well, right? Like in many cases, you're out there for a long time. Chances are you aren't fueling properly. If you aren't fueling properly, chances are you're probably not drinking properly. So
it's a cool day though, and
the fact that all these characteristics carry over from heat exhaustion to dehydration to improper nutrition or low glycogen just reinforces the whole mental aspect of this, the whole central governance of it. It's being controlled elsewhere. It doesn't really matter what's bringing us to this point where the body or the brain needs to intervene. We're getting there because we're in a threatened state.
Mm-hmm. And Nate, as you were mentioning there, on like a cold day, you sweat less, you probably need to drink less. But at the same time, I think that many times when it's a cold day, most of us drink way less and probably a little too little.
I was going to say there are riders who want to do, there's a badge of courage of doing 100 miles on just water and salt. Mm-hmm. And in that situation, if you're drinking a bottle every hour, it's 55 degrees, you're probably not dehydrated and you could experience a real bonk. But I'm assuming you would, I think a real bonk's way worse than dehydration. And sometimes dehydration can end in a cramp too, which is bad, but not as bad as from what you guys are describing, a real carbohydrate bonk.
Yeah, and I think it's worth mentioning the nausea component of this too. So I've definitely been in situations where I'll finish a race, for example, and I'll be very depleted. Like I won't necessarily have bonked, but I'll be very depleted, and my stomach is not happy. And it took me a while to figure this out, but when I get to that point, if I can get some fuel on board, especially with liquid, that actually cures the nausea. But it's really, really uncomfortable because the nausea is making you feel like the last thing you want to do is put anything on your stomach. And usually in those cases, solid foods are more difficult to get down than something liquid. But if you can just get some liquid calories into your system, often the case is that's like the perfect solution. It will actually cure the nausea. So if you can just like keep that small little rational part of your brain online at those moments and convince yourself that, okay, I know this feels like a horrible decision to make because I just feel awful right now. Sometimes that's exactly the thing that you need to just feel 10 times better.
One other tip to avoid bonking is to figure out your consumption rate of carbohydrate and figure out where you can kind of sit, and then just always know that that's the plan. So for your race, for your training ride, for whatever ride you're doing, just know that if you normally have to take in 60, 70, 80, 90, whatever grams of carbohydrate an hour, make sure that you have everything to be able to do that. And then a good goal is to know that halfway point, I should have drank this much. Where am I at? Or hour by hour, I should have drank or eaten this much. Where am I at?
Yeah. I like to do that hour by hour, and I'll put, a certain number of, I like gels. I know a lot of people aren't fans of gels, but gels or chews or chomps or whatever that are in your pocket. And I'll know like, I need to empty this pocket by, this pocket should be empty 2 hours in or whatever it is. And when to your point, if you plan that and you make those decisions before you get on the bike, those are decisions you don't have to make on the bike. And that helps a lot because then it's not decision making. It's just, now you're just executing. You're just executing. And that reduces the cognitive load, and it can make it a lot easier to just abide by a nutritional plan.
It's too late to make good decisions on the bike or to trust yourself with good decision making because you know that you'll be in a compromised state. So you have to make those decisions beforehand. Yeah, absolutely. One other thing too that can help with bonking is, like Nate said, setting a timer. If you don't have a timer or for some reason you don't want to do that, have your friend be your timer or your reminder. And this has been really helpful for me when I first started riding out, and he actually used to work for TrainerRoad, but a really fast mountain biker named Trevor. We used to do these really big, long rides, and he sucked at eating. I sucked at eating, but both of us, we got to the point where we would be like, have you eaten that yet? Have you eaten that yet? And we were, that was, it's really helpful. And just, you need another perspective because the fact is many times when you're on the bike, you are not going to want to eat when you should be eating. But you have to look at it when you're fueling the performance on the bike. You have to look at it as a relationship of there's a fire burning and I need to put fuel on that fire. If I don't, then it does start to go down. And it's signaling.
It's signaling to your brain because we talked about the central governor theory as well. you need to convince your brain that it's okay to keep writing checks. And sometimes it's less about the calorie intake and more about just the taste of carbohydrate, that sweet flavor in your mouth that's signaling to your brain that you've got fuel coming in. And then it's just convincing your brain that it's cool, we got this.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly. Anything else that any of us would add for bonking? Cool. Let's go into some live questions that we have submitted here. We do have some Cape Epic questions. Which, first of all, Nate, I scanned through the live comments. It is shocking to see how few people, or actually, it's not how many people have just said Amber, because I anticipated that much, but how few people have said that you and Sophia are going to do well. So if I want odds on this bet, because I think it's going to be good.
I know.
Yeah, I think it'd play out well for me.
We'll really know a lot once Amber comes out here and all three of us descend together on some descents without hikers stopping us. Yeah,
for sure. Yep, absolutely. Okay, first one is actually along the lines of Cape Epic from John. He says, are you going to publish your predictions for Cape Epic? It would be great to look back after the event. We're doing it right now. Here. This is it. Yeah. We'll have it in the forum as well. So then we'll be able to take care of that. One correction I need to make too. I actually was looking through my bike setup, which, pro tip, by the way, everyone should have in a notes app on their phone or anything else. You should have a bike setup note. And that should have all, like I have all of my bikes and then the settings that I have for them. And I looked back through that. I'm actually at 14 and 15 PSI, or 14 and a half and 15 and a half PSI on my tires. So I started at 13, 14 with the inserts. Correct. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, and I reserve the right to adjust that as I constantly change and tweak everything on my bike. So, okay, next one from Habib Faye says, I'm sure someone has asked this before, but how do you determine how much room there is to improve FTP? I'm 34 years old. I'm new to cycling, 6'3", about 200 pounds, with a 250 FTP, and I'm starting TrainerRoad next week.
Yeah, so we get asked this question a lot, and we've kind of covered a little bit on the podcast, but it's two things. It's where is your ceiling genetically, and where are you right now too? So we don't know where you're at right now in terms of fitness. Maybe you've been doing Division I sports for a long time, and this is pretty close to where you're going to be. You're a power athlete or something, or you could have never trained in your life. I always think of, Matt Lieto, where he used to be, what was it, 380?
He was very heavy.
Yeah, really heavy. And then started training and then got down to like 180 with like a 400 watt FTP and actually winning half Ironmans. Mm-hmm. So you can't really say what your current body state is of what your genetics would be. And of course, he had a very fast brother, Chris Lieto, who got second at Kona way back in the day. So we don't know what it could be. We might someday be able to estimate or give you some kind of idea, but that's still ways out. So the best thing to do is just to train and don't worry about where your ceiling is going to be, but just try to improve every block. Can I keep getting better? Can I execute better? Think about the process, and the outcome is just going to happen, whatever happens.
Yeah. And also remember that there are other aspects of your riding that you can improve too. So, sky's the limit on skills and other aspects of riding that will make you a better athlete.
Mm-hmm. Next one, I gotta say this name, from Stubbsy, says, if you feel hungry, is it too late to recover from that mid-ride? So I don't think that he's talking about like actual recovery, but if basically the common assumption is if you feel hungry, it's too late. If you feel thirsty, it's too late. I think that that's the common saying that we're talking about here.
Yeah. I think that stems from that whole nonsense behind if you're thirsty, it's too late. Like mm-hmm. You'll never get on top of your hydration levels again.
Mm-hmm.
Might as well just give up and stop drinking.
Exactly. Race is over. I mean, you're dehydrated. Day done. That's some nonsense. If you're thirsty, well, obviously drink. If you're hungry, well, obviously eat. I mean, will it impact your performance? Yep, probably. But you'll get back on top of it at some point. And it's always, as everything is, contextual. So is this a multi-day stage race? Because if you're hungry in the midst of stage 2 of a 7-day race, that's a bigger concern than if you're hungry with 1 hour to go on your weekend ride.
Now, Grant, go ahead, Nate.
No, you go ahead.
I was going to say this is, however, something good if you are relying on hunger for your Garmin reminder, so to speak, or your signal to eat more. It's not a reliable one for you. So yes, you shouldn't just rely on hunger to trigger you. And if you were really relying on hunger, yes, you likely have put yourself down into a hole. But that does not mean that eating at that point will not help you. So
if Chad and Pete get close to us or our head, I am going to place like the finest South African wines and local beer in front of Chad and Pete, because they could both not do it, especially if it's something that they might never get to drink again in their lives.
Allow me to clarify. I said I wasn't going to drink any beer. That's all I said.
I see what you did there, Chad.
Lots of wine. You gonna drink wine between stages?
You'll never know.
Yes, I will.
You probably will, actually. Yeah.
This is going on Instagram. Everyone's knowing.
Yeah, I would love to believe. I mean, I'm fully invested in this. I promise you. I've kicked around the idea of curtailing or even ceasing my beer intake at some point, and I think I started at like a couple weeks out, and then it shrunk to a couple days out, and then I agreed that I wouldn't drink the night before. I mean, I'm still coming to terms with that hole that I'm
once you land in South Africa, you can stop. But on the flip plane, it's whatever you want. And
this
Amber,
is a classic example of planner versus doer brain.
Amber, you had a story of a world champion, and she would drink one.
Yeah, she'd have a beer or two
day?
before every race.
Wow.
Like
she's, oh yeah, my body's used to that, and I'm pretty sure pizza is too. So I think we can get away with a little bit of intake, and I can't see us getting. Until the race is over, I don't think there'll be any temptation for us to push it further.
And there's an audible here. There's in the playbook. There's an audible, and it's got a real thick bookmark on it. And that's if you have like 6 flats on day 1, and like you guys, then at that point it's just like party on bikes, you know.
Fair point. Yes.
Well, that's another good point, actually. So if one of us has a really bad day and is out of the overall, we can still do stage wins. So we should try to figure out how many stage wins each one of us can get, because that's another fun thing. Because if one of us, because it could happen where like the 6 flats could happen and it could be not your fault, and that would just be such a bummer. So we'll have to look at the stages.
This is relative stage wins too. You're talking about amongst each other
between us,
just to clarify.
Not 3.
Nino's going down.
Not that you'll just like flippantly pull a plan B and go for a stage win. Yeah,
exactly. But that would be pretty cool. So
man, I can't wait to bet on this. The forum is going to just be on fire during this race. It's going to be so much fun. I can't wait. So
I know I've already trying to think of how we can do some podcasting, because I want to do short kind of recaps without it, and I'm getting a mobile thing that we can use just on my iPhone, where we can kind of plug in and share a mic and talk really closely at a table, and hopefully get some content up quickly.
There's also there's something I just tested out too, which can let you just do it via like your phone. Like everybody can just talk on their phone too, if you guys are like recovering in different spaces, and then it automatically packages it and uploads it. Like it's just all done. So
it's amazing.
We'll definitely find a way to get content to you guys from that. So man, I can't reiterate this, how excited I am not to be doing it. I'm just really excited to be watching. So
why is that? It's because it's not technical. If it was technical, you'd be happy.
Yeah.
Or is it the dirt?
Yeah, it's just so it's almost like if I'm going to be mountain biking, I really want to, like, I love it so much. I want to do the thing I love. And to me, Cape Epic looks like not really what I enjoy about mountain biking. Just lots of long, not entertaining necessarily trails or anything else like that.
It's just like road riding.
Honestly, I'd rather do a road stage race. It's weird, but there's this like middle ground. If mountain biking becomes what that is, like with Cape Epic, then I'd much rather do a road stage race. I know that probably doesn't make sense, but I'd rather do the thing where the thing is meant to be, so to speak. Yeah. I don't know. And not saying it isn't like a mountain bike race. It's an amazing race. It's super cool, obviously, and it's extremely hard. And it's not like I'm saying it's not hard enough. It would conquer me 10 times over, right? So it's not that. It's just not really what I want, what I love to do. So
it's like a bunch of Leadvilles back to back, not at elevation though, with some technical sections thrown in. But over the whole thing of 33 hours, maybe there's 5 hours of technical, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of it's fire road climbs and descents, which I think that's the part where John's, maybe if it was a gravel race, John might be more into it.
Honestly, yeah, exactly. If now single track 6 next year, yes, BC bike race, I want to do both of them in 1 year. That would be amazing. So like, I love stage races and I love mountain biking. So, but those ones really do it for me. So just hopefully we can actually get back into Canada next year with the whole situation that we have right now. So, okay. Let's go into another question that we have right here. That's from First Hippie. Says, I've added 50 watts to my FTP since January doing high volume sweet spot bass. I'm moving to build after the last FTP bump. And he mentions the fact that it's difficult with the VO2 workout there. So he's asking basically, why not just keep doing sweet spot? If it's working now, why not just keep doing it?
It's a fair question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Consider your goals. I mean, do you need to have any particular type of fitness right now, or are you just simply trying to elevate FTP? And if you're content with the monotony of sweet spot base, because high volume is entirely sweet spot base, and you feel like you can keep going and keep eking gains out of it, I don't know why you would steer away from it. If it's working for you, I mean, it's that if it ain't broke.
Especially if you're not racing, there will be a time where you're going to need to do some VO2 work. And if you're a road racer or a mountain bike racer, just doing sweet spot will be, you probably have more benefit in a course if you go into build and then specialty. But I'm a good example of this too. Just doing sweet spot a lot, it really helped me get a lot stronger. And actually for Cape Epic, lots and lots and lots of sweet spot, I think, because that's really what every question for the next 6 months is just going to go right back to it. But lots of sweet spot that's pretty much what we're going to do, right? Is sweet spot for
but these
days.
are unusual circumstances too. You can do one thing for a heck of a long time because we don't really have anything. I mean, if your goals are simply to elevate FTP and this is working, why change it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I would offer the flip of that. So exactly right. Like, figure out what your goals are and work backward from that. And I would offer the other side of the same coin, which is don't avoid the VO2s just because you're struggling with them. Learning how to do VO2 intervals is itself a learning curve. Like, that's a hard thing. It's hard to get. Those sensations are never comfortable. They will never feel good. It's always going to be super hard. And honestly, even now, I was doing some VO2 work last week, and in the middle of the first interval, I really was like, there's no way I can do another one of these. And then I did the second one and felt like I could barely finish that one. And then I did the third one and felt like I could barely finish that one. And I managed to eke my way through the whole workout. But every single time I was bumping myself back into that zone, I was feeling like this is not going to be possible. Learning how to do that is really, really valuable. So if you don't need the VO2 stimulus for whatever goals that you have right now, sweet spot is super effective and you can still get really, really fit on that. On the other hand, there is some value to just trying to learn how to tackle that challenge. So I wouldn't pick the sweet spot just because the VO2 is not a lot of fun right now.
Yeah, good point.
And those, those VO2 repeats, I mean, even if you're not chasing a particular physiological adaptation or performance adaptation, they're a good thing to sprinkle in anyway, just because they offer perspective and they offer motivation. I mean, the perspective comes in the form of, these are super hard. So when you return to, you go from 120% for a couple minutes of time and you return to 85, 90, 92%, 94, whatever, everything scales a little bit. Those become slightly more manageable. You expect that resistance to kick in if you're an ergo, or, to feel that pressure on your legs when you shift into the gear to start the interval. And it's dulled. It's like, oh, this is so much nicer. I can definitely do a 20-minute or a 10-minute interval of this. On top of that, the motivation you gain from it, being able to, what Amber just described, gut out a really hard workout, get through it, that carries for days and weeks.
It's a superpower. It gives you
is.
superpowers.
I was just going to say, I was thinking of Nate's, like, channeling Nate when you were saying that, Amber. Next time you come across a hard workout like that, just be kind to yourself. Don't worry about it. Just don't do the workout. Anytime it gets hard, until Cape Epic, whenever that is next year, just don't do it.
Well, I just noticed that he updated this and said goals, all the races went away. So I would say with that, if you don't have a specific goal, this is a great time to learn how to tackle these things. Experiment, because if you can't get through the workout, try again, like the next day or the next week or whenever the next opportunity comes up. It's not going to, there's no goals, so there's no getting set back right now. So why not experiment and learn how to tackle these things?
And just because you've seen 50 watts from the first bout with this does not mean you're going to see 50 watts again. There is a point of diminishing returns.
That's a good point.
Yeah,
and it
happens 3 times and you're pro probably.
Right. And, yeah, exactly. So this is why in many cases, and to your point, Amber, I've been telling a lot of people, just go through with base build specialty, even if your events are canceled, or just base build, something like that. Like, let yourself work on something different and maybe explore something different, because
or
no
if you've never and if you've never stacked 2 sweet spot base segments in a row, that's another thing that you can try and just see how you see how it works for you. I mean, just figure out,
Don't feel locked into the entire sweet spot base phase. I mean, if you start working into the round 2 of high volume and the gains stop coming or the motivation falls, well, then it's past its point of effectiveness.
A couple of questions on outside stuff. First, best everyday wheel depth. And they mentioned, like, for just a typical Saturday group ride sort of a thing. Let's say everybody here, Nate?
50s.
I'm 40 to 50, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's ideal. And you can get them so light these days. So, and with how light mountain bike and gravel wheels are getting, I bet we're going to see a huge change in road wheels over the next 3 years or so. They're all going to be starting to get extremely light, even deep section ones, which will be pretty cool to see. Next one with outside stuff. When training outdoors with TrainerRoad outside workouts, which is pretty darn awesome, by the way. I've been doing a ton of them now, and it's been a blast. That helps me get more specific training on my mountain bike. So that way it's just easier to train on the mountain bike, not on the rollers, but to do it outside. So it's pretty awesome. Okay, so when training outdoors, is it better to be in the power zone at the top of the zone during the sweet spot intervals? And then mentions, I try to be at the max number for VO2 max. So a couple tips for this one. Actually, Chad, go ahead, maybe on the physiology side, and then.
Sure, yeah. I was just going to say, with sweet spot, it's a pretty narrow range. So honestly, if you're anywhere within it, you're probably deriving the same benefits you're going to get at the low end to the high end of the range. I mean, we're talking about a 6-watt spread or a 6% spread. With VO2 max, it's kind of what you can repeat and get through the workout, but also what happens to your next workout as a result of that. Because VO2 max work is one of those where you can really overdo it. It may not seem like it at the time. You may be able to tack on another interval or two, or maybe do them at 5% higher than you did them last time. But what impact does that have on the higher quality workouts that follow?
One thing to add to that too is the fact that with VO2s, like Chad said, what can you sustain throughout the workout? Try to aim for the power target that you can actually maintain the whole way through. Don't go max out every time, just because that's a good way to make sure that the next day's workout is going to be tough. So
yeah, and we've talked about VO2 max work not being about the highest watts you can repeat so much as the highest level of breathing and highest. I mean, we're looking for something that riding those watts will manifest. So it's easy to get tied to the watts, but what we're looking for is more about what the body's going through when it holds those particular watts.
Another point to make too is if you read Chad's descriptions for the workouts, you'll see that many times what Chad is talking about is, do as much as you can to stay at this sort of target. It's not like your workout is null and void because you were 1 to 2 watts off, or you were 5 watts off, you were 10 watts off. It's not. So, and we've talked about this many times at different points. And you can actually see an article where Sean, one of our copywriters, actually wrote an article on this where he compared people that did the workouts inside on TrainerRoad versus the same workout done with TrainerRoad outside workouts synced to their Garmin or their Wahoo, and looked at the differences. And in the end, the same intentions were carried out. Like, yes, maybe they went about it in a different way, but the same intentions were carried out. The one pro tip that I would have is set up your Garmin or your Wahoo, especially if you have a Garmin. You can set it up with a custom workout screen, and we have that on our blog. And it's really cool because that way what the custom workout does, or a custom workout screen, is it has a target field. And that target power field will actually select halfway in between that range and just give you a number to search for. And it also makes it way easier because you don't have a bouncing around number. You also don't have an average you're trying to drag up or drag down. It just helps because you can see it's populating on the graph down below, but then you just see where the target is and where you're at. And I personally do 10-second smooth power outside. I know we have another question about holding smooth power, and I do 10-second power when I'm training outside, and it just makes things way easier. You'll find yourself not worrying and constantly chasing the ball up and down quite as much. So it's an awesome way to train, fantastic way to train. So with that, Thank you, everybody, for joining us. It's been an awesome podcast, and you can submit those questions that you have. Please do so at trainerroad.com/podcast, and we'll be back next week. A reminder to stay tuned to the TrainerRoad forum for the new podcast that we have coming, the Successful Athletes podcast, and then upcoming thereafter, we will have the Science of Getting Faster podcast. If you want to be on the Successful Athletes podcast, shoot me an email, jonathan@trainerroad.com. I would love to hear your stories, then we can share it with other people. Remember, it's not just race wins. It's any sort of success that you should feel proud of. We want to share that sort of a story. So with all of that, we'll talk to you all next week. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, friends.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.